That gives you an idea of the illustrations here. This is by A. Milne, and it's called The Old Sailor. And it reminds me of my predicament right now. There once was an old sailor my grandfather knew, who had so many things which he wanted to do, that whenever he thought it was time to begin, he couldn't because of the state he was in. He was shipwrecked and lived on an island for weeks. And he wanted a hat, and he wanted some breeks, and he wanted some nets or a line and some hooks for turtles and things, which you read about in books. And thinking of this, he remembered a thing which he wanted for water, and that was a spring. And he thought that to talk he would look for and keep, if he found it, a goat or some chickens and sheep. And then, because of the weather, he wanted a hut with a door to come in by, which opened and shut, with a jerk, which was useful if snakes were about, and a very strong door to keep savages out. He began on the fish hooks, and when he'd begun, he decided he couldn't because of the sun. So he knew what he ought to begin with, and that was to find or make a large sun-stopping hat. He was making the hat with some leaves from the tree when he thought, I'm as hot as a body can be, and I've nothing to take for this terrible thirst. So I'll look for a spring, and I'll look for it first. Then he thought as he started, oh dear and oh dear, I'll be lonely tomorrow with nobody here. So he made in his notebook a couple of notes. I must first find some chickens. Oh, and no, I mean goats. He had just seen a goat, which he knew by the shape, when he thought, but I must have a boat for escape. But a boat means a sail, which means needles and thread. So I'd better sit down and make needles instead. Well, he began on a needle, but he thought as he worked that if this were an island where savages lurked, sitting safe in his hut, he'd have nothing to fear, whereas now they might suddenly breathe in his ear. So he thought of his hut, and he thought of his boat, and his hat, and his breeks, and his chickens and goat, and the hooks for his food, and the spring for his thirst. But he never could think of what he ought to do first. And so, in the end, he did nothing at all, but basked on the shingle, wrapped up in a shawl. And I think it was dreadful the way he behaved. He did nothing but basking until he was saved. And here we are, sailor being saved. And that is how I feel about the enforced stay-at-home practices. I'm winding up basking.